The evidence is that ever since Common Core, the scores have
Yeah.
gone down. I've written about why that might be, but basically, we're burning kids out. You don't improve test scores by making school no fun.
Hi, this is Rusty Keeler, and you're listening to the Play Nature Podcast, where we talk about play, nature, playing in nature, and the nature of play. I'm glad you're here. Let's have a listen. All right. Hello. We are back with Peter Gray. And, I know that I'm still digesting all that Peter shared in part one about play and play from a biological perspective of why it is so important for creatures, mammals on Earth and other creatures, especially humans, and what is affecting play, the freedom to play for children in kind of our day and age, and looking at mental health. And so in this episode, we dive deep into what is affecting our children and what is hurting their mental health. And this is the spoiler alert. From Peter's perspective, it's not phones. So let's pick up where we left off, where I asked him about what happened to children's mental health after the 2000s.
So the computers became a saving grace, saving kids from what adults had done, which was to deprive them of the opportunity to be kids. Now they had a new way. Kids are very clever.
And then what happened?
So why did it go back up again?
Yeah.
So again, as you probably know, there are some people who claim it went back up again because of the iPhone and social media. It is true that it's around 2010 or so that most kids now had not just computers at home that they could use, but they had this thing that you could carry around with you, right? So you're
Yeah.
never far away from it.
Yeah.
And so it's a tempting argument, and Jonathan Haidt has made this argument in his book that has been so popular, that something about the use of this has caused kids to become anxious and depressed. Maybe through social comparison through it. There's various kinds of arguments. Jonathan Haidt is wrong. He's absolutely wrong on this. And there's no question about what he's wrong. Everybody who's done the real research in this says he's wrong, with one exception, and that's one person who's done very little research. But there are dozens of review articles looking for correlations between the use of iPhones and social media and mental disorders. No evidence of clinically significant correlation overall. Moreover, this did not occur everywhere. The kids in Europe and the European Unions were not deprived of cell phones and social media. They were glomming onto it just like kids here. No increase in anxiety, depression, suicide among beginning in 2010 for kids in the EU. So what happened in the United States that didn't happen in the European Union? The thing that I've come up with that happened is Common Core. The Common
Mm-hmm.
Core state standards, which dramatically changed schooling. Schooling had continued to get more and more oppressive and anxiety provoking, but with Common Core, which really limited what teachers could do in the classroom and insisted that teachers be basically drilling kids for standardized tests, school became far, by everybody's assessment who's looked at, school became far less fun and far more stressful than it was before. And so to test this hypothesis that is Common Core, I've looked at a couple of other countries that made similar changes in their schooling system. One is the UK, which made their change. We made our change between 2010 and 2013. They made their change between 2015 and 2016. In the UK, the spike in anxiety, depression began to occur in 2015, 2016, and went
Mm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
Sweden made a change about the same time that we did. They also had an increase in mental disorder around that same time. So we've got some further evidence. So those countries that where schooling became more oppressive, more anxiety provoking than it was before, that's where the increases in anxiety and depression. The other thing is, I believe, I've always believed if you want to know what's bothering somebody, ask them, right? We've got all these people making inferences about what's distressing kids. What if we ask them? So it turns out there are quite a number of studies that ask them. So one of them was a study done in 2013, which would have been after basically all the states had adopted Common Core or something similar in the United States. A study called Stress in America by the American Psychological Association. They do this periodically, and usually it's just adults, but in 2013, they included teenagers. Teenagers turned out to be the most stressed out people in America.
Oh, yeah.
And in response to the question, there was a checklist of things you could check that are major sources of stress. Far and away, the most frequently thing checked was school. 83% of kids checked school.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the kicker. The previous time they did this, they did included teenagers with the same checklist, was 2009. That was before states had adopted Common Core. The APA wasn't studying the effect of Common Core. This is just coincidence that they had done it a year before Common Core and a year after most states had it. In 2009, it was also the case that kids checked school more often than anything else, but it was something like 47%, not 83% who checked
Mm-hmm.
school.
Mm-hmm.
So the almost a doubling of the number of kids who were basically saying school is really stressing me out. So nobody wants to say this. Nobody wants to admit it. Everybody wants to blame those evil social media companies. That's a lot easier to point our fingers at that than to point our
Mm-hmm.
fingers at ourselves for promoting a very toxic school system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you say oppressive, and I can just picture like it's pressing. It literally is pressing down. It's trying to press down earlier, academics earlier for children. I mean,
Right.
if we go back to our earlier conversation about play, like it's the children, finding who they are and what they need and what they're interested in being with, it's like this kind of growth this way. But here it's like it's pressing down, and it feels like because of the pressure that schools have been feeling, that they're eliminating the fun stuff, arts and music and recess and stuff that does
Right.
bring the joy, that does connect to more the spirit of the child, because the schools themselves are feeling the pressure of meeting the grade and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is, I mean, if you think about it, it should not be surprising that changes in schooling systems would markedly influence mental problems, the mental health for kids. Kids spend more time in school than any place else except at home. In school, they are basically locked up. There's no
Mm-hmm.
way, there's no kind way of saying it. They're basically imprisoned. They're locked up. They are micromanaged. They're told exactly what to do. This would be highly stressful for anybody,
Mm-hmm.
anybody. No adult that I know of would accept a job that's anything like being a student in school, where you are told exactly what you have to do. You are judged regularly. You are constantly compared to your workmates for who's better, who's worse. You have to ask for permission to go to the bathroom. You get a 15-minute lunch break, which is common in many schools today. 20 minutes is the norm almost. And that's it, right? This is child abuse, in my opinion. And we should not be, this should be the first place people would look for the reason for anxiety and depression, not the last place.
Hmm. One thing is like, what if school was fun? Like, what if it was, that pressure that they're all feeling, the administration, the teachers, they feel pressure. I think there's probably been studies of how they feel about education and their level of stress.
Absolutely. There are studies, and there's no question about it, especially early on. There were studies, and teachers objected very much to it. There was increased pressure. There's reports by teachers about the increased pressure on everybody in school. There's reports by school psychologists about the increased pressure on everybody that came with Common Core. There was no secret about it. You know, the irony is the whole purpose of Common Core was to improve academic scores on standardized tests, like the international PISA test. So we were embarrassed, like some other countries were, that the Chinese were so outscoring us on the PISA test. Nobody was talking about the fact that Chinese kids were committing suicide at rates way higher
Oh,
than in our
geez.
country.
Whoa.
But they were impressed that they were doing well on those PISA tests. So we wanted to improve PISA scores. So we thought we gotta make our schools more like the Chinese schools, right? We gotta do something. We've been too lax with these kids. So that was the reasoning behind it. That was also the reasoning behind why Sweden made their change and the UK made their change. So, but here's the kicker. The Despite this, the evidence is that ever since Common Core, the scores on those international tests as well as national tests of reading and mathematics, which are primarily the subjects that we're supposed to be focused on, have gone down
What?
ever since Common Core, have
Uh,
gone down.
yeah.
They were actually trekking up a little bit, gradually up for something like a 20-year period prior to Common Core. Then they started going down. I've written about why that might be, but basically, we're burning kids out.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
burning. You don't improve test scores by making school no fun. You don't improve,
Cramming it.
cramming it, and what's even worse is one of the main purpose of Common Core was to increase everybody's score, but also to reduce the so-called gap between the wealthier and non-wealthy.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
turns out the gap has increased over the course of Common Core.
Uh,
It's the kids at the lower end of the achievement spectrum have been dropping faster than the kids at the upper end. And again, that's not surprising. When you put pressure on people for whom it's a struggle, the tendency is to just drop out. Even if you're not dropping out of school, literally leaving school, you drop out mentally. This is just not for
yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids have learned they're going to pass me anyway, because part of what's happened with No Child Left Behind is schools don't fail anybody because it looks like you're leaving somebody behind when you fail somebody. So nobody fails anymore. You can do nothing and you're still going to pass. And there's a certain number of kids who've learned that. Those are not the high achievers. Those are not the ones headed off to Harvard and Yale. They're
Mm.
they're the ones who basically are saying, I'm the hell with it. This is too much work. I'm doing badly anyway. Why try?
Gosh. And so okay, so this is this system, right? That
Yeah,
by adults
right.
for children. And so it's a system and I always think like, well, okay, it's well-meaning on some level they have their goals or what they're trying to do. And yet it goes counter to what we were talking about initially about the instinct to play, the instinct to find out your passion, your gifts, the skills that you have and how you want to be in the world, that what comes from the child. And I can
Right.
just see that the education system often squashes that because of their goals to get there, what they think you need to get through to be a successful adult when really maybe it's that listening, it's listening to the call or being encouraged, having adults that are and I know schools, right, it's a huge system. We got millions and millions, tens of millions of children that need to somehow get through, but there's different models that model like listening to the child, to the call, to the instinct. And what if schools were like that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really, I mean, school has become, first of all, public education is largely a monopoly. It's some people, of course, can afford to take their kids out and for homeschooling or something else, and more people are doing it. but it's largely a monopoly, so it doesn't really have to appeal to its audience.
Hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
and if you have, and the other thing about it is the purpose of school, there was a time when you could argue that the purpose of school was to train young people for life. And that meant, that part of that justified having a lot of recess, having a lot of creative kinds of activities, having time to discuss ideas, having civics classes and having shop and home ec.
Mm-hmm.
It's too
Mm-hmm.
bad that they were sex segregated. You should have had everybody doing home ec and everybody doing shop. We understand that now. But but we used to have those classes, right? Which had to
Mm-hmm.
do with life,
Real, yeah,
real
yeah.
skills, right? The skills that you could use at home, you
Yep.
know.
Yep. My mom is a home and careers teacher, and she
So,
said, "What I'm doing is like the real life stuff. What every kid writing a
right.
check, frying an egg, sewing on a button."
That's right.
Yeah.
So school became, at some point, it became all about getting kids into college. It
Mm,
became, everything became the academic track, as if everybody is supposed to be an academician and a
mm,
very narrow understanding of what it takes to get you, into college, which is to get high scores on these certain academic tests. And to some degrees, the colleges have abided by that. They look at these high scores and they make a decision partly based on that. And so every parent now wants to get, or almost every parent, certainly every middle class and above parent wants to get their kids into not only a college, but a selective college. And so they're pushing for high scores. They're pushing their kids for high scores. They're even pushing the teachers. I hear from some private schools in particular, where the private schools really do have the possibility. They don't have to follow Common Core. They could do what they want, but they get pressure from the parents to have less recess. They get
mm.
pressure from the parents for that. And so I've been invited to speak at a fair number of those kind of private schools where parents are paying $50,000 a year to send their kid to kindergarten, let alone to 12th grade. And the staff or the administrators are inviting me to speak to the parents because they'd like to get the parents to calm down a little bit
That's
about
right.
this.
That's right. Relax, relax.
Relax a little bit about it because they get it. The parents are on the cases all the time of the teachers these days to be sure that they'll argue with a low grade. Parents will argue with teachers about a low grade.
Oh
You know
man.
that, and a low grade might be a B plus these days in these
Yeah.
schools, right? So
Yeah.
that's so we're in a cycle that is objectively absurd. It's just plain absurd, but in a way, it's a trap. I mean, in some senses, I'm sympathetic with the parents. The parents are hearing all the time about how important it is for their kid to get into school. They want the best for their kid.
Yeah.
And they believe that the best for their kid is going to be to get into a selective school so they'll get a good job, so they have a good income. And they've bought the idea that to get into that selective school, they've got to not only do they have to get high grades in school, but they also have to do the right extracurricular activities. They've got to do volunteer activities, work for charities. I think it's great to do things for charities if you're doing it with a charitable disposition, not if you're doing it to improve your resume. But this is what kids are being pushed to do is all this stuff, and they have no time left for play or leisure, very little time. And what time they do, they something you can do kind of in snatches and little bits of pieces is playing on this thing. And so I don't blame them for doing that, right?
Hmm.
It takes time. It takes more time to get up something else.
Hmm. Right. That is like the phone is like their little bit of freedom, like
Yeah,
their
exactly.
own world, like away from
Yeah,
the adults.
exactly. They can do this even while they're on the school bus. They can do it when they're in between things. They can do it if they're sneaky enough. They can do it in a boring lecture where they're not getting anything from the lecture anyway. So,
Well, that's wild, right? So it is. It's like this secret world
yeah,
through the web, through the internet
right.
of like, oh, here's like the kids' world. Is this invisible
Yeah,
network?
yeah.
Hmm.
People used to talk about the culture of childhood, and there was actually sociologists who would study the culture of childhood back in the 1950s and 60s and even before. And what they would do, they'd go into any given neighborhood, and you'd find children had sort of their own world, their own culture was an outdoor world. You'd play games. The games played varied from neighborhood to neighborhood. There were different kinds of social norms and expectations that were really entirely separate from, in some sense, entirely separate from the adult culture. But what people argued is, in some sense, this was preparation for the adult culture. You're learning the norms of a group of people. You're learning to follow rules. You're learning this is how you become part of a culture. Well, we have destroyed that culture of childhood to the degree that it exists outdoors, but kids have recreated it online.
Hmm. Their secret world, right? Their
Yeah,
culture, their language.
right. Like there's these abbreviations. POS means parent over my shoulder. You better be careful what you're, be careful what you say. So they really do. They've got their language.
Oh my gosh. Huh. Well, it's interesting because then that takes me back to like you said about children and the instinct, flowing like water to find still that
Right,
spark of their freedom or their companions, their creativity.
right.
So you've studied Sudbury schools?
I really got started in this area when my son became a student at the original Sudbury School, the Sudbury Valley School, and at that time, partly because I was concerned about what this might do for his future, did a study of the graduates of the school. This was a long time ago. I mean, this is a school where, as you know, there's nothing, all the trappings of school are just not there. There's no there are kids there typically, most Sudbury schools, kids there are from age 4 on through high school age, but they're not assigned to separate spaces. They're not called kindergarten kids or high school kids. They're just kids who are there. They're not segregated from one another. They're not confined to separate spaces. They can go anywhere they want in the buildings or out of the buildings. All the rules of the school are made by school meeting, where every student and every staff member has a vote if they wish to show up and have a vote and vote. But none of the rules have anything to do with academic learning. They all just have to do with the kinds of rules that would be necessary for any large group of people to get along with one another. Rules like if you take out a piece of equipment, you've got to put it away. Like no bullying. There's a rule called the personal rights rule that if you are doing something to somebody, no matter what it is, and they say stop, I don't want you to do it anymore, you have to stop, or you've violated their personal rights. So that's kind of their version of an anti-bullying rule. Rules about littering, so it's not anarchy. It's a place ruled by law, but the law is created democratically. The rules are created democratically. So the intent of the original founders was to produce democratic citizens. So
Hmm.
in a democracy, the belief on the part of the founders of the original Sudbury School was we wanted to raise democratic citizens, and yet our schools in America are the least democratic institutions we have.
Sheesh.
They're the
Yeah.
most autocratic institutions we have. How do we expect to raise people who have a real appreciation of democracy if they don't have the opportunity to experience democracy as they're growing up? And so the idea was that a school should be a place where children have all the rights and privileges and responsibilities of democratic citizens. And they believed education will take care of itself. We don't have to worry about that. It'll take care of itself. So this was way back in 1968. The school is still going on. There are now many schools modeled after it. There are hundreds and hundreds of graduates out there in the real world. So my first study was a study of the graduates
Hmm.
long ago. and found that they were doing very well in life. And so I could relax about my son being there.
Yeah.
And but more than that, it really triggered my interest in everything that I've been studying since. My interest in, well, if they're somehow they're becoming educated in this setting, even though they are not being taught in the kinds of ways that you see at school. The staff don't call themselves teachers, at least not at the original school. They don't even call themselves facilitators. They're just staff members.
Hmm.
And if you ask them why they don't call themselves teachers, they say, well, we don't do any more teaching here than anybody else does. Everybody kind of teaches one another in the normal process of just living together and doing things together. At any rate, it got me interested. And so I, along with a graduate student who did his his PhD dissertation on this, we did a lot of observations at the school, and that's when I became really impressed.
Do you want to see a few pictures of a Sudbury school?
Sure.
Yeah. You know, I've been lucky with my work designing, natural play spaces that, it's kind of a self-select group of people that bring me in that they want that kind of thing and they will like free play and all that kind of stuff. So I've gotten to see some really interesting schools. And
Oh,
before I get to the Sudbury, there's this one outside of Boston, the Asira School. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, no.
I learned this term. It's for twice exceptional children. So I learned that to mean they high IQs, but also might be like neurodiverse, ADHD or on the autism spectrum, dyslexic, different kinds of things. So maybe a typical school wouldn't work, but they are highly, highly intelligent and creative and everything. So it was some of the best facilities and projects I've ever seen at a school where the incredible wood shop. They're building boats, they're building, house models, all this incredible stuff. They're doing like electronic music on computer, and they have like the Berkeley School of Music people coming in that are professors to help them that like specialize in that kind of stuff. And so they're really able to like dive into really what fascinates them, what they're interested in, and have these kind of experts help them. But the outdoors was like rough and tumble adventure playground, like wild, digging holes and lumber and all this kind of stuff. And it just felt like, okay, that's good for these kind of children, but it's good for all children.
Yeah,
All children need that kind
exactly.
of thing.
Right, right.
And so then I was inspired by the Sudbury School. So this is interesting because I got a call one day, and it was from an adult, but it was to bring me in to do some actually building with children out in their woods. And it was because the Sudbury School, where the children had been doing research, they wanted to do some construction in the woods, and they found me. The kids did in their research. So then
Wow.
they had their guide, the adult, like give me a call and invite me in. So I was doing construction with them, and of course, the school has a nice building, and there's all sorts of classrooms and art rooms and game rooms and couches, and there's video game rooms. But it was that children have choice of kind of just a playful space. But they have choice of what they want to do. This is kind of what you're saying, follow your instinct and find your passion. And so they were, they have all the materials at hand. And then, so here's some of the kids,
Well,
rough and tumble group there.
mm,
But so then we were just building stuff out in the woods. And, I had this aha moment. So it was a school that nobody's really forced to do anything. It's kind of the opposite of the public school. So when I was out there, even in the beginning of the day, certain kids were out there because there were some that were gung-ho, like they're the ones that called me in and they wanted to build all this. And then there were
wow.
some that were sort of interested, so they're coming and going. And then there were other kids that couldn't care less. So they didn't come out to talk to Rusty Keeler, to talk to me, or whatever. They're doing their own thing in the classroom,
Yeah.
in the building. And I remember, walking through. Maybe I was getting a drink of water and a little break or something. I saw them and it was like, wait, they're supposed to be out with me. And then of course it was like, wait, that's the beauty of this. They
Yeah.
can be if they want to, But if it was a public school, everybody would be rounded up and everybody would.
Right. Right.
But here they had the freedom. And so then this was just interesting. Just they were tasked to like wash tires. But this really changed my mind about tires. I used to be just nature play. But then suddenly every time I came by, they're like building all these great contraptions and cool
Right.
stuff.
Right.
And then this idea of like, oh, they wanted to do some stuff in rope. So, they get out the book of knots and start learning some stuff. So it was very interesting to see a school that had a different model.
Yeah.
And then there were some kids that were, they were somewhere else in the woods just doing their own tea party. And they had, games, Gaga Pit.
If you really look at children's play, it no longer becomes surprising that they become educated, even if they're playing almost all the time. They're when you really see what they're doing, when you see the sophistication that is involved and the intelligence and the exchanges that are occurring when they're playing and exploring together, it becomes no longer surprising that they would grow up to do well.
That's that interesting thing again of like it's coming from the child, that it's coming from them, from the inside out.
Right. Right. The difference between a child who's decided they want to learn something and the child who's being forced to learn something is night and day. And this is true for what we think of as the main initial functions of school as anything else. Children at Sudbury schools learn to read, they learn to write, or in this day and age, type. They learn to use numbers to the degree that numbers are important in their life. And nobody has to teach them this stuff. They learn it. They learn it at different ages, but they learn it when they get interested. There are kids, there, as far as I can tell, with all the years of Sudbury Valley School, and the staff members tell me this is so, there has never been a child who didn't learn how to read, including many children who've come to the school with a diagnosis of dyslexia, came from public school, couldn't read, got a diagnosis of dyslexia, came to Sudbury Valley, where nobody was particularly teaching reading, but you could ask for help in reading if you wanted from somebody. And they all learned to read. So the difference has to do with, in reading, but everything else, is when you want to do it and the pressure is taken off of you. So you're doing it because you want to do it and not because you're trying to perform in front of somebody else who's judging you. Learning becomes way easier.
Yeah. And then there might be joy.
Absolutely.
Joy and curiosity and interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very inspiring. And Peter, you are very inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for taking some time. And I know I've got some serious new nuggets and things to think about, and kind of the instincts, the instinct to explore the instincts,
Yeah,
right?
instinct to practice instinct.
The instinct to practice
That was actually Gruce's language. Yeah.
Yeah. And even while some of this stuff is a little depressing, of the kind of the crushing nature of education, there's still the hope, that kind of has that instinct is still hopeful. Like there is that spirit that is trying to find its way in all children.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yay.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Thanks for listening. Do you have a comment or a question? Email me at playnaturepodcast@gmail.com. I like talking about this stuff. And maybe we could use your question on a future podcast episode. As always, I have some free goodies for you in the show notes, including my outdoor loose parts guide. Fun stuff in there. And so I wish you the best in your outdoor play adventures. And when it comes to adding nature to your yard, or loose parts, or saying yes to risky play, my favorite motto is dream big, start small, and never stop. Oh yeah. Woo, 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 woo. Let's do it. All right. Have fun out there.